Welcome to another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast where we discuss everything Orlando Magic basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we've got a ton of crazy stuff to get into about the Orlando Magic. But before we get into it, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily Orlando Magic content. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Shout out to everyone who's already hit that button. And if you haven't, bro, what's up with you? Turn the red button gray. Join the gang. We are on the road to being one of the biggest pages on the Orlando Magic front when it comes to YouTube, man. So let's get right into today's news and show you why you should be here every single day. Starting with some interesting statements by Jeff Teague on his podcast about the Orlando Magic versus the Detroit Pistons. And he believes that the Detroit Pistons are just better than the Orlando Magic. Let me state exactly what he says. He goes to say, I'm more worried about Detroit than them, to be honest, talking about the Orlando Magic, because they've got people that can guard Trae Young. They do. They got young athletes that can stay in front of Trae Young a little bit. He goes a little bit further down throughout the podcast, and he says, nah, bro, none of them is messing with Cade. None of them is rocking with Cade at all. The Magic ain't never won, bro. Why do you keep talking like they're like that? Y'all about to start making me hate the Magic. All right, man, listen. Let's go ahead and start the podcast relatively spicy by saying this doesn't make any sense. I know that Jeff Teague is a former Atlanta Hawk. Most of his best years in the NBA probably were played in an Atlanta Hawks uniform. He's just wrong. Jalen Suggs, Anthony Black, Desmond Bane. I would say all three of them, especially those first two guys, who are all NBA caliber defenders, can guard Trae Young. Is anybody locking up Trae Young necessarily? No, I don't think so. I think he's too good of a facilitator where if he can't be effective as an offensive threat shooting the ball, he's still a guy who can imprint his impact on the game as a passer, especially because they put real athletes around him now with Dyson Daniels, Jalen Johnson, and so on and so forth in terms of what they built. Zachary Risachet showed off a lot of athleticism in the open floor last season. This is a guy who has athletes around him in a real way now, and as a high-level facilitator, can still kind of get his when he wants to, and then on top of that, still get his other guys involved in a real way. No one's shutting down Trae Young, but this idea that the Detroit Pistons, yes, with Jaden Ivey coming off of a season-ending injury, Malik Beasley no longer plays for them. A second-year Ron Holland. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. Yes, they have Asar Thompson. I'll give you that. Defensive specialist type, doesn't necessarily have a ton of on-ball action as a three-point shooter, more of a slashing guard. Isn't that what Anthony Black is? I'm not saying Asar Thompson is the same tier as Anthony Black. I think Asar Thompson is definitely a better defender than Anthony Black, but by so much, right? Because I think that when you look at what they both bring offensively, they both kind of have to be high-level defenders in order to get on the floor at a significant rate. I think Asar Thompson's athleticism also is a tier above where Anthony Black's is, and that's another thing that gives them significant upside. But both of them are above-average ball handlers, below-average three-point shooters, primarily slashing/driving type guards when it comes to being able to get offensive equity, right? Being able to really monopolize the offense in any way. Their most effective traits are getting downhill, and they defend at a high rate. That's Anthony Black. That's what Asar Thompson is, and that's what Anthony Black is. Aside from Asar Thompson, name the next big-time defender for the Detroit Pistons. Huh? I mean, let's be real. Let's be honest here. The Orlando Magic have a much better core defensively to guard Trae Young than the Orlando Magic do. I mean, the Detroit Pistons do. That doesn't make any sense. The Orlando Magic, far and beyond, have a better defensive unit than the Detroit Pistons. If we're talking about guarding Trae Young, and nobody's messing with Cade Cunningham. Cade Cunningham, all-star player, borderline all-NBA player last season. If no one's effing with Cade Cunningham, who in the Detroit Pistons is messing with Paolo Banchero? Tobias Harris? Tobias Harris is guarding Paolo Banchero? Who's guarding Franz Wagner? Is that Cade Cunningham? So now he has to be an all-NBA caliber defender as well. Don't get me wrong, Cade Cunningham is an above-average defender, especially for the position. But if no one's messing with Cade, who's messing with Paolo? Jalen Duren? Isaiah Stewart? Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. If no one's messing with Cade Cunningham, nobody's messing with Paolo Banchero, and the Detroit Pistons do not have a better second option than Franz Wagner. Facts. Facts. The Detroit Pistons do not have a better second option than Franz Wagner. Facts. Are Paolo Banchero and Cade Cunningham practically on the same tier? I believe so. And then from a defensive perspective, who are their top level defenders? Past Ausar Thompson? Oh, exactly. Exactly. This team got absurd high-level three-point production from Malik Beasley last season. An all-star season from Cade Cunningham. Tobias Harris being consistent. And real contributing depth from guys like Tim Hardaway Jr. What? So you're betting on Tobias Harris again, and those other two guys aren't even on your team anymore. But they're better than the Orlando Magic and are more likely to be able to guard Trae Young and the Atlanta Hawks at a high level. Sorry, Jeff. You Teaguing. You Teaguing. I believe that's what they said on the podcast means. You're lying, you're capping. You're Teaguing. Because it's just cap. It's not true. It's not true. The Orlando Magic are much more geared to guard just about every team in the Eastern Conference right now in comparison to the Detroit Pistons, in comparison to the Atlanta Hawks. So this idea that you would take the Atlanta Hawks over the Orlando Magic, don't get me wrong. The Hawks had a really solid offseason. Kristaps Porzingis, solid pickup. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, definitely a big-time guard defensively and a guy who can knock down the three ball at a high clip. I'm not going to disrespect their offseason by any means. But this idea that, like, there's nobody on the Orlando Magic that can guard Trae Young is absolutely crazy. And I'm not going to say you don't know ball, brother, but you must definitely not have been watching the Orlando Magic last season. That's fair. They were relatively injured most of the year. But when this team is healthy, they got two guys. Now, if you throw in Desmond Bane, three who can competitively guard him at a high level, and two of them are guys that are either all-NBA caliber or definitely high-level defenders for the position. So the idea that Trae is just going to give these guys the works must not have been watching enough Orlando Magic basketball to be able to make a really strong point on that. Next up, let's talk about Bleacher Report. Bleacher Report recently dropped their off-season grades for all 30 teams in the NBA. And guess what? The Orlando Magic got an A-. Bleacher Report seems to be a big fan of what the Orlando Magic got going on, and to be more specific about what they feel like they liked about this offseason. Let me pull it back up. It had a lot more to do with the fact that Desmond Bane just fits so evenly with what the Orlando Magic needed this offseason. More particularly, it says, if there was any question before about how relevant the Magic were, that's settled now thanks to the team's trade for Desmond Bane and to a lesser extent signing Tyus Jones and additions of assistant coach Joe Prunty and God Shamgod, obviously offensive coordinator and player development coach. The Magic also reached a maximum salary contract extension with their top player, Paolo Banchero. We talked about that on the podcast as being a net positive. They also got a team-friendly deal because if you look at that fifth year, there is not a player option on it, if I'm not mistaken. Orlando may be in the East title contention mix and should field its best team since Dwight Howard's heyday. Sounds great, right? An A- instead of an A. The price to trade for Bane included 4 unprotected first-round picks and a 2029 first-round pick swap. And that price will feel even heavier if the outgoing 2026 first rounder becomes a lottery pick because Phoenix's falters. So an A- all because they may have overpaid for Desmond Bane, which I think a lot of people, even Orlando Magic fans, would agree was a bit of a hefty price for a guy similar to Mikal Bridges that didn't make an All-Star game or that hasn't made an All-Star game yet. Fair. But I think that an A- is a good way to look at it. You locked up your superstar long term. Now you have him on a similar, if not extended timeline compared to the rest of your core four, right? Then on top of that, you bring in two guys that are going to help from a developmental standpoint in terms of opening the offense up more and developing specifically with God Shamgod the guard position, which he has a very significant history of doing, and particularly now with a built-up backcourt that has Jace Richardson, Tyus Jones, Jalen Suggs, Anthony Black. I'll throw Jet Howard in there as well, right? Having a guy like that, and particularly his combination with Tyus Jones as well as a veteran leader in that backcourt, now has a real chance to grow in a way that could build legitimate offensive structure around Paulo Banchero and Franz Wagner in a real way that they desperately needed. Because this team has basically just been playing Franz Wagner and Paulo Banchero hero ball with a handful of guys who are athletic and can defend at a high level. That's been their mojo. And yes, it's gotten them to the first round of it's gotten them into the first round of the playoffs. They also have not been able to get past that. And secondarily, they've been the worst three-point shooting team in some capacity over the last 2 to 3 seasons. So addressing the shooting, addressing player development, and addressing offensive infrastructure all in the same offseason paired with getting a guy who adds to all of that in Desmond Bane, getting a guy who adds to all of that in Tyus Jones, getting coaches that add to that in Prunty and Shamgod, and doing it all at behest of your superstar who did request more guard assistance, did request a more refined offense, did request that obviously he wanted to be able to see more depth within the roster given the fact that they were just decimated last year. You handled every checkbox that you could have as the Orlando Magic this offseason, and the worst thing you did was you probably gave up one or two too many picks for a high-level starter that may not be an all-star anytime in his career, but has the ability to be a 20-point-per-game scorer, 40% three-point shooter, and an above-average defender for the position. Sounds like A- caliber work to me, and I think that Bleacher Report was very fair on this. I think also they took into account the optics that are across the board with things like, again, bringing in significant coaching help and re-signing your superstar, two things that I do think are a very important aspect of an offseason grade. Not everything is done through free agency because not every team has the money to sign free agents, at least not high-level ones, of course, right? So when you take everything into account, I think the Orlando Magic do deserve an A-. Some would even say a B+, and I wouldn't even argue with that. But I think that if your biggest knock against the Orlando Magic truly is the picks for Desmond Bane, I think a lot of us would knock the amount they gave up. But I think we all understood the philosophy that they were going under when they chased that player. And at the end of the day, if you get your guy and it all works out, we forget about all of that. Because if the Orlando Magic win a championship within the next 2 to 3 years where they have Desmond Bane locked up, all is forgiven. We said the same thing about the Knicks with Mikal Bridges, and they were a handful of games away from being in the NBA Finals in their first year with Mikal Bridges a part of the roster. Obviously, they brought in Karl-Anthony Towns as well, but nonetheless, they were, and he was a high-level contributor in that time frame, especially in that series against the Boston Celtics. Talking about Mikal Bridges. If Desmond Bane has 1 or 2 games in the postseason on caliber with what Mikal Bridges did in that series against the Boston Celtics, you look back at those draft picks and you feel a lot better about giving them up for that guy. If this team makes the NBA Finals in the next 2 to 3 seasons, you feel better about giving up those picks for that guy. If this team wins a championship, comes out of the East and wins a championship, you look at those picks that they gave up for him, and you completely moot point. You're no longer worried about them on the same level because at the end of the day, you accomplished what you swung for. You accomplished what you swung for, and they got a high-level player off of picks that in a couple years may not matter if everything comes to fruition. Next up, let's move to an article that talked about Tristan da Silva. The article particularly was talking about the most disrespected hidden gems according to Bleacher Report, on all 30 teams. And for the Orlando Magic, the most disrespected hidden gem was Tristan da Silva. They say They say positional overlap with Paulo Banchero and Franz Wagner will forever cap Tristan da Silva's role on a healthy Orlando Magic team. The thing is that they were far from fully healthy last season, and he filled in admirably for a huge chunk of the schedule, at times stepping into a starter's role and doing a lot of silent defensive dirty work. Another guy who could potentially guard Trae Young at a high level. By the way, Jeff Teague, Orlando still has room to give Da Silva regular reps as a reserve. It is not teaming with backup wing options, and rolling out his 6'8 frame will be more appealing than having Anthony Black scale up to certain positions. That actually is a very good point. Although Anthony Black is an above average size or about an average size for today's NBA guard, he's a guy who can guard up, but having Tristan da Silva as a high level guard at 6'8 makes it where Anthony Black's versatility to guard the 1 and the 2 becomes that much more valuable, because you don't have to also scale him to guarding 3s and 4s. That's something that Da Silva has the capability to do. They go on to say there might be slightly more offensive utility to Plum. The Magic had him first initiate plenty of sets in Las Vegas. We talked about that a lot during the early portion of Summer League about Tristan da Silva. His biggest goal, and the goal from the coaching staff for him, was for him to be more aggressive as an offensive initiator during Summer League, and he did show that on a multitude of different occasions. The quote goes on to finish to say, but da Silva will shine brightest playing within himself. He, more than any other role player, may benefit from the arrival of 2 additional creators in Desmond Bane and Tyus Jones. I think that's a great point. The article finishes off by saying, the article that was all this pulled from says, if Da Silva's flashes of talent turn into consistent contribution, he will emerge as a key player for the Magic in the chase for control of the Eastern Conference next season. Tristan da Silva is not the X factor that Anthony Black is, as we discussed a few episodes ago. But Tristan da Silva is a huge cog in the system for what the Orlando Magic are trying to do this season, particularly when you look at the lack of depth behind Paulo Banchero and Franz Wagner. Those are 2 guys that give you significant depth at the 3 and the 4, because there's 2 of them that can fill in at either position if either were to miss significant time. But if both were to miss significant time, a la last season, a guy like Tristan da Silva becomes that much more important. We've seen now through this offseason that they were able to acquire real talent to make up for the loss of Jalen Suggs. You bring in Desmond Bane, you bring in Jace Richardson, you bring in Tyus Jones. But the forward position has not necessarily been protected as much as that guard position has, mainly because you look at the forward position and you say we have 2 stars at that spot. You also add in the fact that you have Goga Batadze, who can play the 4. You add in Jonathan Isaac, who can play the 4. You add in Wendell Carter Jr., who can play the 4. You add in Noah Pinda, who you drafted, who can be a 3 for you at 6'8", right? You look at that and you think, oh, we've got all this depth at the big man position, but particularly from a ball handling specifics perspective, now things get a lot different. You look at the level of ball handling that Franz Wagner and Paulo Banchero are asked to do as offensive initiators, and then you look at the depth behind them in terms of that translating down the depth chart, not the same. Wendell Carter, not asked to be a ball handler. Jonathan Isaac, not asked to be a ball handler, right? Noah Pinda, I think, can be an above-average ball handler. We saw it in Summer League, and we know that he has the ability as a 6'8 guard to handle the rock at a high level and be a real threat in transition. And then there's Tristan da Silva as well, who I think Tristan da Silva in the pecking order would be above Noah Pinda, of course, but still. So Tristan da Silva is very, very important in terms of opening up his role, particularly as a defensive specialist in the very beginning. Could on-ball reps be a very significant impact of his ability moving forward to be more effective on the floor? Yes, of course. As he becomes more and more versatile as an offensive player, it opens up the possibilities for the Orlando Magic to play small ball with him at the 3, Franz Wagner at the 4, Paulo Banchero at the 5, right? There's opportunities to exploit that by him being a much more dangerous offensive weapon on ball. But if he can defend at a high level at 6'8 and shoot the 3 ball at a much increased rate while still being a guy who could attack closeouts, positional versatility allows him to guard 1 through 3, 1 through 4 in certain scenarios. That unlocks a lot for the Orlando Magic. So although I believe that Anthony Black is the biggest X factor for the Orlando Magic. I can understand why Tristan da Silva is the most disrespected hidden gem, because he's actually a guy who could be considered as a bigger X factor than Anthony Black, but is under discussed in comparison to guys like Anthony Black. And I think that, that makes things a lot more interesting, because at the end of the day, I think Tristan da Silva and Anthony Black both have a very high level of responsibility as guys coming off the bench next season, and both are going to be very, very important to the Orlando Magic making a push for a postseason run. But at the same time, again, the difference between him and maybe Anthony Black is his ability to show on-ball versatility minimized compared to Anthony Black, who at the guard position has a lot more chance to, increase his on-ball reps and things of that nature. Let's end on some controversial hypothetical trade scenarios, because we do that every single podcast, right? That's all they do all season long, is come up with different trade scenarios for all the teams, because of course that's the most intriguing part about the NBA, right? Besides the play on the floor, the most intriguing part about the NBA is who's going to be changing jerseys this season. And according to predictions, PFSN, which by the way is a pro football and sports network site, so take it with a grain of salt that their site is mainly geared towards the NFL. But nonetheless, reports from them predict that the Orlando Magic could trade for Denver Nuggets guard and NBA champion Jamal Murray in the event that the backcourt outside of Bane disappoints early on. This is targeting Jalen Suggs. This is targeting Tyus Jones. This is targeting Anthony Black. The article goes on to say, let's first observe how this wild scenario would look from the Magic's perspective. Murray is certainly an offensive upgrade over Suggs, but it may not be worth it given the number of assets needed to land him. Not to mention there's a major defensive drop-off from Suggs to Nikola Jokic's longtime number 2 option. The article, talking about what PFSN said, it shared that Murray's four-year, $208 million contract he signed in late 2024 is what motivates the Nuggets to move the 28-year-old. The all-rookie guard begins this extension next season. Denver's front office would, according to PFSN, seek out young pieces and draft capital in exchange for Murray, which the Magic are severely lacking after acquiring Desmond Bane. The reason this is pitched in the first place is because Murray will provide the Magic with even more offensive firepower and create quite an electric backcourt next to Desmond Bane. This is crazy. This is crazy. This is absolutely absurd. Would getting Jamal Murray be a significant upgrade for the Orlando Magic on paper? Yes. Yes. Jamal Murray, Desmond Bane, Franz Wagner, Paulo Banchero, Wendell Carter Jr. at the center spot. Pretty insane work from an offensive perspective. Definitely. You're probably going to have to give up Jalen Suggs in that trade. You're probably going to have to give up potentially Anthony Black or Tristan da Silva, and probably Jet Howard. You'll probably have to give up Anthony Black or Tristan da Silva and Jet Howard and Jalen Suggs in order to be able to get this done. And the Orlando Magic are already struggling with depth. Not struggling with depth. That's wrong. I think that we're actually a much deeper team than most people are giving us credit. But that would significantly take us from a team that struggles with depth, that then improved their depth in the offseason, to back to struggling with depth. I guess that's the best way to put it. We were a team that struggled with depth last season, improved that depth significantly, particularly at the guard position this offseason, and then would be yanking back. It would be a 2 steps forward, 3 steps back in a weird sense. Maybe 2 steps forward, 1 step back, because Jamal Murray is a high-level talent offensively. But I think that Jalen Suggs is too much of a culture setter. I think he's too impactful defensively. I think he fits too well next to Paulo Banchero and Franz Wagner at the guard position. I also think that Jalen Suggs fits way too well next to Desmond Bane as a defensive-oriented guy. You have to think about him very similarly to when Drew Holiday played point guard for the Boston Celtics next to Derek White, and his ability to be able to be the defensive guard next to a guy like Peyton Pritchard off the second unit. Or you look at what Drew Holiday was able to do with the Milwaukee Bucks as a lead guard for them that was mainly a primarily defensive option, right? And you have to look at what Jalen Suggs, and I would say arguably that Jalen Suggs is on par, if not better, than Drew Holiday as a defender going into 2025-2026 season. I genuinely believe that. And so I think that although the prediction says that Jamal Murray is a guy that the Orlando Magic are and should be targeting, what you have to give up both is probably too expensive for Jamal Murray, but also I think that it would hurt the overall roster construction when you think about just how much of a linchpin Jalen Suggs actually is. And I think if you have to give up either of Tristan da Silva or Anthony Black, I think that hurts you even more because, again, all three of those guys provide a real defensive infrastructure to this team, real defensive identity to this team. And I don't think you just trade that for a 28-year-old guard that is not necessarily the most lethal offensive player in the regular season, shows up in the postseason, gives you a couple of games of, oh, wow, this is why this guy should be considered as an all-star, but never seems to be able to make the all-star team. And you have to ask yourself if that guy is enough of a floor raiser to put you over the top. I thought Desmond Bane was considered as the Jamal Murray trade if we're talking about getting offensive upside at the guard position. Doubling down on that by then getting rid of Jalen Suggs in order to get more offensive firepower feels like we either don't believe in Desmond Bane enough to be that guy. Jalen Suggs falls off significantly as a three-point shooter and or as a defender, and primarily as a defender, because I think Jalen Suggs would have to have a complete fall off a cliff kind of season for us to feel like we can't believe in him as an offensive threat next to Paulo Banchero and Franz Wagner, because his three-point shooting is elite and his defensive prowess at the guard position is elite. So if we're trading for if we already traded for Desmond Bane, trading for Jamal Murray feels like doubling down on something that we weren't comfortable enough doing in the first place, but did because we had the draft capital to go after a guy like Desmond Bane. Right? Because if Desmond Bane, for what we traded for Desmond Bane, we might as well have went after LaMelo Ball. We might as well have went after Darius Garland if we're just going to end up trading for Jamal Murray a couple of months into the next season anyway. We should have just went for a higher upside offensive player than trade for Desmond Bane, who's more of a guy that can average 20 points per game, but is still more of a system caliber player at the same time, as opposed to being a system unto itself, a la a LaMelo Ball, a la a Darius Garland. If we're going to trade for Jamal Murray to be in the backcourt with Desmond Bane, then we don't believe as much in Desmond Bane as an offensive creator as you would think for a guy that was traded for 4 to 5 first-round picks. What this article does not know is that trading for Jamal Murray, even if Desmond Bane is having a solid season and the other guards around him are not necessarily playing up to snuff, what this article does not indicate, does not also make very clear, is that if we have to also trade for Jamal Murray, the Desmond Bane trade didn't work because he was supposed to raise the tide from an offensive perspective. So those other guys have to just be average, and he would raise the tide, and the trade makes sense. If you feel as though you have to trade those other guys to double down on offense, the trade for Desmond Bane didn't work. So the likelihood that the Orlando Magic will be chasing after a guy like Jamal Murray, highly unlikely, and this prediction is probably going to go down the toilet. Let's be honest. Plus, the Denver Nuggets are not going to trade Jamal Murray. You can say what you want about the fact that his deal kicks in next season. This team just got significantly better this offseason. Tim Hardaway Jr., Cam Johnson, they move off of the big contract that was Michael Porter Jr. They bring back Bruce Brown. This team is not trading Jamal Murray to get Jalen Suggs. No disrespect to Jalen Suggs. That's not what I mean. What I'm saying is this core already knows what they're capable of with a two-man game of Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray, and they just got better from a depth perspective because they also are adding Deron Holmes, who was their rookie from last season, back into the front court. This team is not trading Jamal Murray, and the Orlando Magic are not trading Jalen Suggs. But with that being said, that is the end of another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast. A little longer today, but a lot of really controversial information being thrown out about the Orlando Magic. So we had to get into all of it. Again, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily Orlando Magic content. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Peace.